longer video today. This is a Frankensaw junker that I picked up that I'm just tearing down to see what's going on with it. I already know it's blown up. All the recoil screws on this one are mix and match. Most of them on the 55 Ranchers are either going to be 4mm Allen or a flathead. This is a combination of the two. So that's why it's taking me so long to get the recoil off. Pretty filthy looking in there. Everything looks good. Spring works. Taking the top cover off. On these, usually it's a size 2 Phillips head. A weird dirty spot on that air filter, right in front of the throat. So that tells me that there was some blowback, which means that you had gas oil mix coming back out the carb with the downstroke. Take off the brake, it's filthy, throw it in the box. Just removing the bumper spikes. These are 4mm Allens. That one's got some shit in the hole. Get the twigs out of there. Removing the wrap handle bolts now. These are 4mm Allens. On some of the earlier saws, they were a very coarse thread 8mm hex bolt. Pulling that little cover off, the vibe mount and tank vent you can get to from behind that as well. Pulling the chain catch off, exposes that vibe mount. Pulling 2 bolts out of the bottom of the handle. All these are 4mm Allen on this saw. Just pop the handle off. Two 4mm Allens hold the carb in place, and one down through the case holds the plate itself in place. The two that hold the carb in place are plastic. Well, the bolts are metal, but they're threaded into plastic. These are a weird design as the carb comes off in one piece. Throttle rod and everything. Fuel line still connected. Pulling this out right here to inspect the fuel line. Usually if a 55 or 51 has a bogging problem, there's a good chance the fuel line's busted. The chance where they break 9 out of 10 times is right after they come out of the fuel tank, in that little air gap in between the fuel tank and the crankcase. I'm just taking the choke off, popping the line off the carb. Checking it all out, make sure it all works. It does. Gasket. Just popping the kill switch lead off. That connects to the coil itself. Look at this. Ugh. It's disgusting. Very little maintenance was done on this saw, as you can tell. This little grommet here that surrounds the I guess you'd call it the air vane. It directs airflow from the recoil. That's why I call it an air injection saw, is actually because of that port right there. Take those two 4mm Allens out that are holding the intake head in place, and then pull straight away, gently. Well, gently but not gently. It will take quite a bit of force to pop the intake boot off, but you also don't want to break it. It's a Phillips. It's actually a Phillips head screw that I'm unscrewing here, but it has the slot that goes all the way through. You have to take that off, and that releases the air vane so that you can pop the intake off, just like that. That big nipple right there that I just cleaned off, that is your impulse nipple. On these saws, it's a very common failure point for air leaks. It's an inferior design. I believe it was a partner design originally. They changed it, obviously. This is one of the only Husqvarna saws. This and like a 36 or a 41 in that series has the same intake boot design, but and a couple of trimmers, but they didn't use it very long for obvious reasons. And that's your impulse line right there. That's all it is, just a little rubber boot pretty much that seals that nipple to the cylinder. That allows vacuum pressure from the engine to draw gas out of the tank. Now we're going to take the flywheel and the clutch off. I use a piston stop, but I believe in this video I use a rope so that I can show. Yeah. So right here what I'm doing is, when you use a rope to stop your piston from moving, you need the piston to be above all the open ports, because if that rope goes into a port and then you tension that flywheel or clutch or whatever you're going to take off, and you pass that piston past the port, you're going to shear that rope off inside the engine, and it's no bueno. So basically you want to rotate the piston until it passes above the exhaust port, because the exhaust port is the highest port in the cylinder. On these you can use, I believe they're 14mm on the flywheel and 15mm on the clutch. That'll be different with most saws, but the procedure will be the same with basically every saw on the planet. Clutches are reverse thread, so they thread towards the front of the saw. I use a breaker bar at home. At work I have an impact. You want to be careful using impacts though, because you can snap the crankshaft off, and that is also no bueno. Alright, here what we do is we thread the nut out so that the top of the nut is flush with the top of the crankshaft. This helps. You can still fuck up your crankshaft with the bolt on the end of the crank. I've done it. Every mechanic I know has done it. This is the safest way to do it without a tool. Hold it and bow. Just give it a good whack right on the center of the crank, and that releases the flywheel. I got lucky with this one and it broke on the first try. So the least amount of tries the better. Obviously it reduces the risk of screwing up the threads on the end of your crankshaft. If you do screw up the threads on the end of your crankshaft, or you bend the actual thin part on the end of the crankshaft, you are hosed and need to replace your crankshaft. So try not to do that at home. Just removing the coil bolts here. These are 4mm Allen bolts. These two bolts are the only two bolts that or different thread size than the rest of them. In a second, it's very obvious which ones they are, but I thread them back into the holes after I take them out to keep the inside of those holes clean, because if you strip those holes out, you are really bumming sometimes, unless you know somebody who's good with a tap and die set. So keeps debris out of them, keeps them safe. These saws actually have, right here, I'm going to take out all the vibe mounts. These are an interesting design. They don't actually bolt in. They sit in with pressure and you pry them out. As you can see here. Be very careful when you're doing this. Alternate sides like you're seeing me do, and try not to rip them. If they do rip, don't worry about it. They are replaceable. That one needs to be replaced. As you can see, it's all deformed and not long for the world. That one came right out, easy peasy. After the clutch and flywheel's out, you can pull the rope out of the cylinder. If you did it correctly, it should just come right out like that. Pop out this mount. I believe, as you can see, I'm watching the Great and Powerful Joe Rogan Experience. If you're watching my videos, it's a damn good chance you've watched his. So yeah, this is the ripped one. One of these was broken, so it's that one. If you got a broken one, then I guess you don't really need to be careful with it, so you just reef her out of there. That one I ended up giving up on. Sometimes they do get stuck. If you can get all the other ones out, then you can push the last one in, and you'll be alright. See, that one popped right out. Okay, just like that. Reclamp off the fuel line so you don't have a mess. 4mm Allen bolts hold the cylinder in place. I've torn these saws down 1,000 times. I can tell you which bolt goes where. When you're doing this at home, you might want to be a little bit more careful with separating the bolts to keep track of what goes where. The saw is obviously badly blown. It's hard to see on the glasses, but here you just fold out the eclip, pull it out. You only have to do one side, and then I take an old Allen bit and I pass it along the side of the other eclip, and you just bang the pin out. The only thing you want to be careful of is not to bend the connecting rod. You don't have to really be gentle with the wrist pin if you're going to replace the piston anyways, because new pistons come with new wrist pins. They also come with new clips. If you're using aftermarket parts, I suggest reusing your OEM clips. The aftermarket clips are absolute garbage. And you don't want to see what happens when one of those breaks off in the engine. Oh yeah, totally munched. Skip them damn political ads. The saw had so little time on it, you can still see the arrow that pointed towards the exhaust port. Some of my videos, this is just me experimenting right now, just seeing if I can see any pits in the top of the cylinder. from cavitation or debris from the bearings going. In some of my videos you might be able to hear a cat meowing in the background loudly. Don't worry about that. He's a very happy kitty. He's just deaf, so he can't hear himself. Or that's the only thing he can hear is himself. His name is Bilbo Baggins. He's an old man. He likes to go on adventures. And show you the oil pump here. 4mm Allen, just like the rest. This one's all crud out. Put a little downward pressure on it. And there she goes. These have a really simple oiler design. Oiler just kind of, the oil pump itself just kind of sits in there. As you can see, I'm trying to use my fingernails to pry it out. The outer oil seal just comes right off. Pump slides right out of the piston, or the piston slides right out of the pump rather. The worm gear for the pump on these is actually pressed onto the crankshaft. I don't have the tool. Well, I have one at work, but it belongs to the shop. And I made this video at home, so can't be pulling that off today. But basically all it is a threaded rod that threads over that brass worm gear, and then there's another threaded section in the center that a bolt presses against the crankshaft and pulls it off. But if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Yeah, I enjoy making these. It's just a hobby right now. I'd like to monetize this page at some point, but obviously I know that the quality of my videos will have to go up for that to happen. But it's a work in progress someday. Who gives a shit? Let's just have fun while we're doing it.